You are destroying yourself and you call it love. You call it loyalty. You call it being a good person. But in the cold light of reality, stripped of sentiment and social conditioning, it is none of those things. It is self-sabotage disguised as virtue. It is weakness wearing the costume of morality. There is a terrifying truth about human nature that most people sense but refuse to articulate. A truth articulated with surgical precision by Niccolo Machiavelli more than 5 centuries ago when he observed courts, kingdoms, betrayals, and the fragile egos of men in power. Civilized society prefers comforting myths. It teaches you that everyone can be redeemed, that persistence in kindness conquers all, that sacrifice is the highest moral act. But strategy, history, and psychology reveal a harsher law. The law is simple. Not everyone can be saved. More importantly, not everyone wants to be saved. There are individuals who do not seek elevation, they seek attachment. They are not searching for a ladder upward. They are searching for something stable to cling to while they refuse to swim. Offer them your hand and they will not climb. They will grip your wrist and pull. They will use your stability as flotation while your strength erodes beneath the surface of their chaos. You have seen this pattern. Perhaps you are living it now. The friend perpetually in crisis. The partner who drains your vitality but demands endless patience. The relative who consumes your resources and repays you with resentment. You attempt to fix. You attempt to heal. You believe that sufficient love, sufficient sacrifice, sufficient understanding will catalyze transformation. But strategic reality offers a colder assessment. A person determined to be universally good among those who exploit goodness walks willingly toward ruin. Compassion without boundaries is not virtue. It is exposure. It is an open gate in a predatory landscape. Predators do not announce themselves with fangs bared. Many appear wounded, confused, misunderstood. They study your empathy and feed on it. If you do not develop discernment, you will be consumed not by enemies, but by those you tried to rescue. This is not cruelty. This is conservation. Your time is finite. Your energy is finite. Your emotional bandwidth is finite. To invest these in a void that refuses to produce growth is not noble. It is negligent toward your own future. Imagine a vessel crossing a violent sea. Supplies are limited. Space is limited. If you permit everyone aboard regardless of their conduct, those who sabotage, those who mutiny, those who refuse to row, the vessel does not become compassionate. It becomes unstable. And when it sinks, the innocent drown alongside the reckless. To preserve the ship, you must discriminate. Not based on emotion, but on behavior. There is a discipline in allowing consequence to operate. When you repeatedly shield someone from the outcomes of their own decisions, you interrupt the only teacher that cannot be ignored, reality. Pain is often the catalyst for growth. When you absorb that pain for them, you delay their evolution and accelerate your own depletion. The instinct to rescue can become a trap, a savior complex that feeds your ego while draining your life. You begin to equate worth with utility. You believe your value is measured by how much suffering you can endure for others. Saying no feels like betrayal. Establishing boundaries feels like abandonment. Yet in strategic terms, indiscriminate sacrifice is self-inflicted collapse. Before identifying the archetypes you must avoid trying to save, you must understand this internal mechanism. Why do you rush into fires ignited by the very people you are rescuing? Because somewhere you learned that love equals tolerance, that loyalty equals endurance, that goodness equals self-erasure. But power requires selection. And survival requires clarity. Type 1 is the architect of chaos. This individual appears cursed by misfortune, yet a closer inspection reveals patterns. Each crisis has roots in impulsivity, negligence, antagonism, or chronic refusal to learn. Employment lost due to conflict. Relationships destroyed by volatility. Finances evaporated through reckless decisions. At first you sympathize. You intervene. You offer resources, advice, connections. Temporary calm follows. Then the cycle re-emerges. The problem is not fate, it is character unexamined. Chronic chaos often masks an addiction to drama. Crisis provides attention. Crisis excuses stagnation. If everything is always collapsing, accountability never arrives. When you attach yourself to such a person, you tether your stability to instability. Reputation, finances, mental health, all become collateral damage. Their storms will eventually erode your foundation. Distance is not heartlessness. It is quarantine. Protect your peace from patterns that have proven resistant to change. Type 2 is the bottomless pit. This is the individual who consumes assistance and gradually transforms gratitude into expectation. The first favor elicits appreciation. The second reduces it. The third becomes assumed. If you hesitate, irritation emerges. Entitlement replaces humility. They reinterpret your generosity as obligation. This dynamic breeds contempt. Dependency often mutates into resentment because your strength highlights their weakness. The more you provide, the more they may internally despise the imbalance. Test this pattern with a boundary. Decline a minor request. Observe the reaction. A balanced individual respects limits. An entitled one responds with guilt, anger, or withdrawal. If closing the tap produces hostility, you are not witnessing need, you are witnessing entitlement. No volume of sacrifice will fill a void rooted in character deficiency. Withdraw before the drain becomes irreversible. Type 3 is the smiling saboteur. Unlike incompetence or entitlement, this archetype operates through envy. They celebrate publicly and undermine privately. Your advancement unsettles them. Your growth mirrors their stagnation. Rather than confront their own inadequacy, they attempt to dilute your momentum. They express concern that subtly plants doubt. They highlight risks when you share triumphs. They question sustainability when you reveal progress. Envy rarely declares itself openly. It disguises itself as caution, realism, even affection. But its objective is reduction. If you attempt to pull such a person upward, they may unconsciously sabotage the ascent. They may share confidential information. They may inject discouragement before critical opportunities. The strategic response is concealment. Limit exposure of your plans. Share victories selectively. Not everyone in your proximity is aligned with your progress. Recognize that envy is not healed by generosity. It is inflamed by it. Pause and observe your own reaction. Faces surface. Names echo. Guilt attempts to reassert control. You hear the internal narrative insisting you can be the exception, that your endurance will finally transform them. That voice is not wisdom. It is ego disguised as compassion. You are not omnipotent. You cannot override deeply ingrained patterns through sheer goodwill. Continued exposure to draining dynamics will erode you mentally, emotionally, and physically. Stress accumulates. Betrayal scars. Chronic tension corrodes health. Type 4 is the professional victim. Distinguish this carefully from those genuinely navigating hardship. A genuine victim seeks escape from suffering. A professional victim cultivates suffering as identity. They organize their narrative around injury. They weaponize fragility. Sympathy becomes their currency. Any suggestion of responsibility is reframed as insensitivity. Any invitation to growth is interpreted as cruelty. They do not desire solutions, they desire validation of helplessness. Offer structured guidance and they explain why it cannot work. Provide opportunity and they emphasize exhaustion. Suggest accountability and they accuse you of lacking empathy. To assist them in rising would threaten the very identity that secures attention and exemption. Therefore they resist improvement while demanding support. When you finally withdraw from perpetual rescue, transformation occurs, not into independence, but into accusation. They reconstruct the narrative to portray you as abandoner. You become antagonist in the story that justifies their stagnation. Understand this dynamic before engaging. Endless accommodation entrenches dependency. Strategic compassion requires allowing individuals to confront the emptiness without an audience. When performance ceases, authentic choice begins. Type 5 is the arrogant fool. Ignorance is not the issue, resistance to learning is. This individual clings to opinion as identity. Evidence threatens ego. Advice is perceived as attack. They repeat destructive decisions with unwavering confidence. You, observing predictable outcomes, attempt intervention. Data, experience, logic, none penetrate the armor of certainty. You cannot reason someone out of a position built on pride rather than analysis. Attempts to do so often convert you into adversary. They interpret correction as condescension. Arguments spiral into exhaustion. When consequences arrive, external blame substitutes introspection. If you persist in trying to enlighten them, you sacrifice energy without altering trajectory. Silence becomes strategic. Allow reality to instruct. Reality does not debate. It imposes consequence. Preserve your cognitive clarity. Reserve counsel for those who request it with humility. Wisdom offered to a closed mind transforms into resentment. Do not dull your intellect attempting to carve insight into stone. Type 6 is the scorpion, the repeater of betrayal. Patterns define this archetype. Promises emerge after each violation. Tears accompany apologies. Oaths of transformation follow exposure. You forgive, believing redemption imminent. Yet behavior repeats. Infidelity, deception, financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, cyclical and predictable. Character manifests through habit. Past conduct remains the most reliable predictor of future conduct. When you repeatedly neutralize consequences, you train them to expect survival after harm. Your forgiveness becomes permission. Self-respect erodes incrementally. And paradoxically, their respect for you diminishes in parallel. Consistent tolerance of mistreatment signals low valuation of self. Separation in such cases requires decisiveness. Partial withdrawal invites repetition. Incremental distancing preserves access. Complete detachment, though painful, interrupts the cycle. Amputation saves the body when infection threatens systemic collapse. Accept demonstrated nature. Believe actions over declarations. Loyalty is habitual. Betrayal is habitual. Choose accordingly. Now observe the landscape assembled before you. Chaos architects, bottomless pits, smiling saboteurs, professional victims, arrogant fools, scorpions. These are not caricatures but recurring psychological patterns documented across eras, cultures, and institutions. You encounter them in social circles, workplaces, families. Recognizing them is not cynicism, it is literacy in human behavior. You may be labeled selfish for establishing boundaries. You may be described as cold for declining rescue missions. Understand the reframing. What some condemn as selfishness is often disciplined self-preservation. What some interpret as coldness is clarity unclouded by manipulation. Transition from savior to sovereign. The savior self-immolates to generate temporary warmth. The sovereign constructs stable structures that endure. Visualize a lighthouse rather than a martyr. The lighthouse does not dive into turbulent waters. It stands anchored, projecting guidance. Those who desire safe harbor navigate toward it. Those committed to wreckage ignore it. The lighthouse remains intact, continuing to function because it does not abandon its foundation to chase every drifting vessel. You are not responsible for rewriting the nature of others. You are responsible for stewarding your own life. When you cease attempting to rehabilitate the unwilling, an unexpected liberation unfolds. Time reappears. Financial leakage diminishes. Emotional turbulence subsides. Creative capacity expands. Health stabilizes. You redirect resources toward relationships that reciprocate respect and growth. As you enforce these boundaries, an additional challenge surfaces. Without constant distraction through rescuing others, you confront solitude. In that silence, you encounter your own unresolved patterns. Perhaps the impulse to save was partly an avoidance of examining your own vulnerabilities. Perhaps you projected inner wounds onto external projects of redemption. Removing parasites exposes reflection. This introspection is not regression, it is evolution. When external chaos no longer occupies your attention, you gain capacity to strengthen internal architecture. Develop discipline. Refine judgment. Cultivate alliances rooted in mutual elevation rather than dependency. Power stabilized internally reduces susceptibility to manipulation externally. Strategic compassion does not eliminate kindness. It refines it. It channels assistance toward those demonstrating responsibility, effort, and reciprocity. It differentiates between temporary hardship and chronic self-sabotage. It distinguishes between remorse and pattern. It honors dignity by refusing to infantilize adults through perpetual rescue. The transformation from savior to sovereign demands courage. It requires tolerating misinterpretation. It requires enduring the discomfort of others' disappointment. It requires resisting the egoic temptation to be indispensable. But sovereignty yields resilience. You become less reactive, more deliberate. Decisions align with long-term stability rather than short-term emotional relief. Consider the broader implications. Institutions collapse when leaders refuse to confront destructive patterns within their ranks. Families fracture when boundaries dissolve under guilt. Enterprises fail when loyalty overrides competence. At every scale, personal, organizational, political, the same principle applies. Resources invested in unreformable dysfunction weaken the entire structure. Discernment is not cruelty, it is stewardship. You are permitted to love without losing yourself. You are permitted to care without capitulating. You are permitted to withdraw from cycles that have proven corrosive. Maturity recognizes that transformation requires consent. No amount of devotion substitutes for another person's willingness to change. As you move forward, practice observational discipline. Evaluate behavior over time rather than isolated apologies. Measure reaction to boundaries. Assess response to accountability. Notice whether assistance produces progress or repetition. Let data inform emotion, not the reverse. When you encounter those who genuinely strive, who accept responsibility, who apply guidance, who reciprocate loyalty, invest boldly. Encourage them. Collaborate with them. Grow alongside them. That is strategic generosity. It multiplies rather than depletes. The ultimate mastery lies in the art of letting go without hatred. Release without bitterness. Distance without drama. Silence without explanation to those committed to misunderstanding. Your clarity does not require universal approval. It requires internal coherence. In the end, the greatest power is not dominance over others. It is governance over yourself. Governance over where your time flows. Governance over who gains access to your emotional reserves. Governance over which narratives you accept as obligations. When you stop attempting to save the unsavable, you cease bleeding for battles that were never yours to fight. Stand firm. Build structures that endure. Shine steadily rather than burning out spectacularly. Allow consequence to teach where words have failed. Protect your vessel so that it can travel far beyond the storms that once threatened to sink it. In that disciplined restraint, you will discover a deeper form of strength, one rooted not in sacrifice without limit, but in wisdom without apology.